Excellent. Well, we're here for a bit of a novel podcast for me. This is a double pod, so we're here with Houdini Swap and Aleo. Um, yeah, so it should be a fun podcast and a bit of back and forth on privacy and on anonymity here. So my first question is for Houdini Swap. Josh, can you introduce Houdini Swap and how it enables anonymous cross-chain swaps across millions of tokens?
Yeah, sure. Look, Houdini Swap is a privacy solution where, for the type of product that we are, we're the market leader in compliant private swaps. So, we built out. We're hitting close to 2 billion annualized revenue. Sorry, annualized volume this year, and we've built the business out over the last 2 to 3 years, really as a single, simple solution for people to be able to transact cross-chain privately, and really provide people with a Web two, very simple interface experience of being able to do that.
Excellent. I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about the exact architecture as we get into this podcast.
We, we, we can get into the detail of it yeah, we can go as deep as you like. No problems at all.
Excellent. As far as Aleo goes, Aleo's redefining privacy in Web3. How do you see, Howard, how do you see programmable privacy reshaping the DeFi landscape?
I think we're in a very exciting time right now because the
Mm,
tech for programmable privacy has now become very performant and very practical for real world use.
yeah.
When you look back 10 years ago, people were just starting to noodle with this idea of introducing some kind of privacy to blockchains, and you see that namely with chains like Zcash and Monero. I think we've now seen over the past decade that there's a lot of opportunities beyond just the token where people are interested in incorporating privacy. For example,
Yeah.
in swaps, where you want to have some level of confidentiality, where you want to have some level of compliance to be able to demonstrate when you're swapping. And, there's applications beyond that. You look at prediction markets, and during the last election cycle, you had people that were, a bunch of journalists trying to track down who was making these crazy bets during the election, right? And so I think people have started to wake up, have woken up to this idea that programmable privacy is almost a necessity for some applications in crypto. And I think this is why it's become so timely now.
Excellent. So both teams obviously kind of share a bit of a vision around, or at least a bit of a thesis. What's the shared vision behind both teams' approach to scalable, private, and compliant DeFi?
Well, I think Howard and I are pretty aligned on the very fact that privacy, and when we talk about privacy, we're talking about compliant privacy. We're talking about banking level security, where normal everyday people can transact and do so without their financial data being exposed. And if crypto is going to go mainstream, truly go mainstream, and it's going to become, the financial system that we all can see that its potential could be, it has to be able to offer people financial security. The very idea that Howard and I can go out for dinner together, and we can split the bill and pay in crypto, and he can see my wallet and everything that I've ever transacted on, not just in history, but in full perpetuity, is not a safe environment for either of us to operate in. Now, it wouldn't be safe for me because I wouldn't have much in it, and it wouldn't be safe for Howard because his is completely fat. He's a huge fat bag. But the point about that is that every time you transact, you have the potential to expose all of your personal financial data, and that is not a an effective system for something that is wanting to go truly mainstream and to be used by millions, if not billions, of people around the world.
Yeah, I would echo what Josh just said there. I think you'll even use the exact example I wanted to reference, which is, look, like when it comes to the shared vision, we are in a unique place right now where crypto has been, almost like it's almost been like a toy example of how finance could work, right? And with the new administration changes, with how governments are thinking about crypto now, we're actually now able to enter into the real world, into the real arena. And like I think this is the time where financial institutions are taking a very hard look at the tech. They're starting to recognize some of the shortcomings of solutions prior, And I think one key area that we're all leaning into is financial privacy and compliance. These are areas that previously people have not really double clicked on. And so now I think people understand this is almost like that last mile, that last hurdle. And once we solve some of these core issues, we're able to actually integrate crypto rails into real world applications and into day-to-day use. And I think that is the ultimate goal for all of us here.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's several reasons why the conversation has really come to the fore, and it's been transformative really in the last 12 months. Aleo, amongst many other things, have got their timing perfectly right. But 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 when you look at that, it's not just simply the change in administration in the US. It's also that timing has also aligned with the fact that the scale of crypto is really starting to go. When we talk about this in marketing, and it's crossing the chasm into this early adoption model, and so it's really starting at the very nascent stages now, moving into mainstream. Now, 10 years ago, there was no one in crypto. So you didn't necessarily need privacy. No one had any real money. I mean, I know that there were some people who did, but generally, we're not talking about trillions of dollars in market cap like we see today, with very significant enterprise type institutions moving into the space. So you now have a system that has tens of millions of people in it. Some of those people have very significant assets. And just for the general user now, it's becoming much more mainstream in their use. People are transacting much more frequently, right, inside of crypto. So privacy is now really hitting that point where this has got to get solved.
Right. So we've mentioned a little bit about kind of the payment use case, but obviously privacy is kind of essential for a whole spectrum of use cases. Can you talk about other benefits of privacy and what kind of applications it enables in finance?
Certainly. I think
Mhm.
there's there's the example that we talked about previously where, you're trying to check out and if you're at a point of sale terminal, you definitely don't want to reveal your bank account to the barista, but also you don't want the coffee shop to be able to just give away their business revenues to the competitors, right? Like imagine if I could just go down the street to my competitor, walk in, check out, and see that information. I think in other parts of the kind of finance stack, think about from a payroll standpoint that a lot of people like to get paid in crypto, especially remote workers. And imagine if you're getting paid in crypto and you can see how much your colleagues are making or how much your boss is making. Like that's a huge HR nightmare. And so, for a lot of the CFOs of the world, I think that's also a very relevant topic to address. When you think also from like aid-based giving or from donations, also a lot of programs are being run in emerging economies, also in sensitive parts of the world, and in some of these places, there are many countries where citizens aren't allowed to hold U.S. dollars, or they aren't, or they should not be receiving money from foreign aid organizations. And so this is where to do these pilots successfully and try out some of these opportunities, you actually need a good level of privacy for the folks that are operating in those circles. And I think there's many examples here where we're starting to see beyond crypto, or sorry, beyond finance, that this is also applicable. When you think about these types of prediction markets, or when you think about like doing any form of governance on chain, you recognize very quickly that, wait a second, in a traditional voting system, I'm not going to reveal who I voted for, but you need a way for the operators to tally up, how many people voted for A, how many people voted for B, right? And that's something that is very sensitive to people, that they don't want the ability to see, if I know your address, that you voted A or B, to be available right there. And so, privacy extends beyond purely from just finance into general purpose applications as well.
Absolutely. But its impact is so significant. It's not just we tend to think about privacy from an investor perspective or a trading perspective. But if you're a brand, if you're a company and you're a brand and you're moving money and people can trace that, that can be incredibly damaging. It's not because necessarily what you're doing is what you're doing is totally legitimate, but you have someone who has no context, no understanding, and also has a social media account that can expose all of your activity in a way that can be massively damaging. And that's just, as Howard has said, that is like just one of of a multitude of different reasons why it's very difficult for what are normal operations in TradFi to actually operate inside of crypto.
Excellent. You guys have both mentioned a variety of stakeholders for which privacy is important. In which kind of verticals is privacy most relevant or being most adopted right now?
Do you want to take this one, Howard?
No, I would say very clearly in this past year, I've had dozens of conversations with various financial institutions, and I think there's a few areas that they've been very interested in using privacy tech. So the first would be really around this idea of identity and identity verification. They've seen that as a huge opportunity, as you've probably seen. More and more of the web is now requiring age verification or some form of identity verification. Governments are also considering rolling out digital IDs for many countries, and a lot of them are considering using Web3 Rails for this because it's faster, it's cheaper, and the thing that they have not really been able to do in the traditional Web2 context is to offer a strong level of protection to their customers or to their users, to be able to keep their information sensitive to themselves. And so what we're
Yeah.
seeing now is a large amount of these honeypots where, like you go onto Google or YouTube or Spotify or Reddit or whatnot, and they're asking you to upload your driver's license, and which has a lot of personal details about yourself. Your full name, your home address, your date of birth, your age, your height, your weight, all this information that really they don't need to know. They just want to know, are you over the age of 18? And if so, then you can access the content, right? And so this is a very clear example where a lot of financial institutions and governments are thinking about, how can we utilize some of the new privacy tech on Web3 Rails to offer some kind of protection for people. I'd say on the other side in my conversations, it's also been really about demonstrating compliance for payments. So as you know, there's a lot of KYC AML requirements for banks, and for them to move money, it's actually a lot of overhead for the sending party and the receiving party to verify that this transaction was legitimate, that it wasn't fraudulent, that it didn't violate rules, especially when you're talking about going cross-border. And so because of that, like this is an opportunity for a lot of the privacy tech that people are building in Web3 now to actually demonstrate that compliance up front as opposed to kind of post factum from an audit perspective. And I think that is a much more powerful way of ensuring that money is moved through the right rails at the right time to the right people.
And really, that was a key decision for us in terms of how we built Houdini Swap out from inception, right? So we didn't build out infrastructure. We specifically and quite deliberately operated and restricted ourselves to operating inside of the app layer, right, rather than going into the infrastructure layer. The reason we chose to do that at that time was because the infrastructure at that time wasn't going to allow us to be able to bring in true compliance. Now that is available now, and networks like Aleo's allow it. But when we built the business out originally, we didn't have that option. And from our perspective, compliance was an absolute priority. Like the last thing that Houdini Swap wants is the Lazarus Group transacting on our platform, and so that really restricted our use. We were looking for technological shifts to come through, and then what you obviously see, and how it's referring to this is the explosion in ZK tech, which is and the technology improvements that are occurring that are extraordinary, which is allowing full compliance now. So I don't want to give too much alpha or secret source away, but that technology infrastructure stack is now going to be part of we're deep diving right now as to how that becomes part of our future as well. And again, because the technology really is there.
Excellent. One interesting thing or a misconception that I think a lot of people have around privacy is we think of privacy as kind of this like tunnel, right? Where it's like me and Howard are able to, transact without anyone else seeing, but it can also shield those two different parties from seeing information from each other that they might not want to expose directly. So it's more a more comprehensive version of privacy, especially with ZK technology. Um, Obviously, we're kind of experiencing this resurgence of a privacy meta narrative. Talk to me a little bit about how this meta came about and why it's persistent versus just kind of like another crypto meta or narrative.
I think we can both speak to this.
Go for it, Josh.
From my perspective, the biggest shift that has occurred is a change in administration in the US, because really, prior to that, you had to be brave to be in private. in privacy. So we used to relate to ourselves as being brave because you had to be bold, you had to be willing to step out in a way that many other players were not. And one of the reasons why is that the space was getting tainted and coloured by bad actors. And you've seen Samurai Wallet, and you've seen Tornado Cash pop up in the press, repeatedly over the years. You've seen prosecutions by certain bad actors in the privacy space that had really tainted it. But what's now shifted is the shift in the administration has completely altered the narrative, and so privacy is the new black in crypto, and because it is a legitimate issue, it is a legitimate problem that does need to get solved in a way where we provide banking level transactional privacy seamlessly to crypto and to all crypto. And the reason we don't think about this in banking, in TradFi banking, is because it's inherent. People don't need to open up a bank account and go, I want a bank account that doesn't expose all of my financial details to everyone I transact with. It's just simply inherent. And so, that's the vision, I think, and the dream for both Howard and I, is to get to that place. And for us, that comes back, full circle to the conversation we had at the start, which is where that's really what drives mainstream adoption.
I'll say I've certainly experienced what Josh is describing in the past year myself as well. From operating, especially from the U.S., where the previous administration was pretty anti-crypto, and we're now in a very pro-crypto type of regime where there's actual regulations being passed, and a lot of
Yep.
policymakers are thinking very seriously about how to design these rails correctly, so that they can operate safely, efficiently, for capital markets. I think this has been a huge turn of the conversation and a huge turn of the page. I would also add that timing of several different things in the past year have also led to people starting to come around to recognizing these shortcomings. And I'd say first off, you see Circle and you see Stripe. They've been going out with acquisitions and also announcements of payment rails of their own. I think that's been very helpful for the broader macro in terms of legitimizing this tech for actual financial use cases on that side of things. And I'd say on the other front, we saw earlier in this year, from a kind of safety and security standpoint, there was a lot of crypto kidnappings and ransom that was going on early on. You saw with the Ledger co-founders incident. And I think that those types of moments really get people to start to scratch their head, especially high net worth individuals in crypto, start to think about, wait a minute, like if someone as high profile as that, who likely has a lot of security, is being targeted, maybe I'm also vulnerable and at risk as well. And when you really start to think about that, suddenly you're like, well, maybe my hardware wallet doesn't just need to be the most secure hardware wallet. It also needs to be the most confidential hardware wallet out there too, because you can go onto websites like Arkham and just start to see all the largest holders, their account balances, what they're trading, when they're trading, how they're trading. All this information is public detail now. And so suddenly, I think a lot of people just wisened up really quickly and realized, wait a second, my OPSEC is not good enough. And they start to realize I actually need better privacy if I want to continue operating and being a part of Web3.
Yeah,
Both
absolutely.
both of you guys alluded to this a little bit, but I think over the last, maybe we'll call it 5 years, the kind of crypto UX has fossilized a bit, where we're accustomed to, a hardware wallet connected to a browser extension, permissionless wallet, and then we have a little app, connect window in the upper right. Does privacy look like this conventional crypto UX? And with just kind of added privacy, or how does the user experience of privacy change over the next year, 2 years, and beyond?
I think I'll jump in on this, and then
Yeah, no, please, yeah.
Houdini Swap has some very interesting architecture to really protect the user's privacy. It's something that when I was using it, was very impressive to me. I'll say, like, the goal, of course, is to make it feel just as smooth and as seamless as every
Yeah.
product you've seen in crypto before. And certainly, honestly, any product that's been a gold standard in Web 2 as well. Um, Under the hood, I would say privacy is much harder to implement. there are a lot of unique challenges in the design space that engineers and designers have to really think about to make that experience really good. And it starts from the very basic fundamentals of finding your information. When you look at a public blockchain, today a lot of people have gotten used to using block explorers where the explorers can just index everyone's data. Why? Because it's fully out there. And so when you go to those sites, they already have all of your information there for you. But when it comes to a private user journey, you actually are relying on service providers that can see that information in a trusted manner, right? So you're entrusting them with visibility to your data. And so this starts to look more like the Web 2 context, where when I sign into my bank account, I'm not expecting that my mother or that my best friend can just see my account balance, how much I'm making, where I'm spending, all this information. But I fully expect that JP Morgan or whoever is the facilitator there is actually able to see that information and is helping to process that. I think that the privacy design space is going to look very similar in that regards, that you will have operators that are going to be responsible, they're going to be professional, and they're going to manage that type of information for users. But on the other side of things, for the end consumer, the goal, of course, is to make that user journey just as slick as anything that you've seen in Web 2 or Web 3. And so I think that is kind of the optimal goal there. And certainly there are folks, including Houdini and Aleo, that are trying to make this as quick, as fast, as cheap, and as private as possible.
Yeah, and from our perspective, and I think this is the case for Howard as well. Like, we're both coming at this from different perspectives. We've come at this from an apps layer perspective. Obviously, Howard and his team are coming this at Aleo are coming at this from an infrastructure layer perspective. But the fundamental focus is about how do you make the whole user experience as seamless and as simple as possible. How do we remove as much friction from that process? So in privacy, that's tricky. Like, it can get really tricky. But that is and by the way, there are some great applications out there that are potentially great privacy solutions that we see in the space, but they really struggle with the user experience piece. It becomes a massive barrier to their adoption, and so solving that piece is one of the great challenges, and I think we're all up for it. But that's part of the challenge for all of us. How do we make this as usable as possible? I probably only have one advantage in startups, and that is I'm older than everybody else, and so I've been doing this way too long, and I always think that the more beautiful and more seamless your UX becomes, it's about respecting your user. How do you truly respect that person so that they have an experience that they completely understand, they're fully confident in, and the whole thing is just, it flows through as beautifully as you possibly can do it. So privacy makes that harder, but that's what gets you out of bed every day.
Yeah, I mean, I would challenge the audience to just even try to think of what is a good privacy wallet out there today, and I would say there's none. Like, I've used every single one out there, and it's very admirable what people have already built, but I think that the flows and the kind of user experience is not where Web 2 accounts, like, you go into Robinhood and the slick UI screens of that, it's not even comparable in that regards. And I think that is a clear demonstration that the tech is still quite early, but we've reached that point now where we can start to improve its UX. The tech has gotten a lot faster. More of the market has woken up to it. And certainly I'll say, we're taking our own look at very hard at the wallet experience right now as well. And so I mean, that's something, for the new year that we have more to talk about.
I think a lot of crypto users think about.
We should talk about that together, Howard, because we're doing the same thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that is something that I would love to jump on.
Yeah, no, we've got some thoughts on that. We'll share them privately after another time.
Privately. I think a lot of crypto users think about privacy as a feature, but obviously there's some clear products that are unlocked when privacy is added to kind of blockchain tech. Can you talk to me about some of those products or primitives that you see emerging, maybe private stablecoins, ZK identities, or confidential liquidity?
Sure. I mean, if you look at the early blockchains, the first thing that they introduced was this concept of just a private cryptocurrency. And you see that with Zcash and Monero. But what I think was fundamentally missing in those design spaces was this idea of private ERC-20s, private stablecoins, private DEXs, private gaming. Those were all things that actually motivated the research paper that started Aleo. So back when I was in grad school, we started working on this idea of introducing private smart contracts. Why? Well, I was an Ethereum dev myself, and I remember trying to write different programs and just trying to figure out what the limitations were. And it was very clear, for example, that I couldn't store or even transmit a secret key or some private information via smart contracts to another counterparty. Additionally, when you try to build games, for example, like Battleship, where you need to hide the opponent's board, and that's part of the actual gameplay is having some information asymmetry. That's simply not possible. A lot of people have looked at GameFi generally. When you look at games like poker, the idea there fundamentally is that you want to be able to hide your hands and your cards from all of your opponents, and certainly from the dealer. And this is something that is nearly impossible to coordinate on a public smart contract system. And so those became the natural motivations for us to actually go and build out a private smart contract platform, was to say we want to enable use cases like that, because suddenly you're actually getting the full fidelity of what a blockchain can do. And again, 10 years ago, I don't fault the first blockchains for not doing that. The tech just wasn't there. It was extremely slow. I remember when Zcash first launched in October of 2016, I was on a MacBook Pro at the time, and sending a transfer took 3 minutes on my MacBook, and at the end of those 3 minutes, my fans, the laptop was just crying. So it was a very unique time and place to be using a blockchain for private payments. And I think fast forward 10 years now, and it's literally 3 seconds on mobile. And so it's really come a long way, and because of that, we can start to look at some of these broader use cases.
I'd agree.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I recently saw a tweet, I think it was just yesterday, that said, the current DeFi trading experience is like gambling with your hand face up. And obviously you don't think about it that way, but you realize that sophisticated actors are looking, and there is
Yeah.
a massive disadvantage to kind of this like public trading experience that we're all used to today.
Look, like
Yeah,
I think that model is fine for, crypto as it was, but if you're talking about really bringing in Wall Street into crypto, you're talking about really professional trading shops, and you're talking about, firms like Citadel like coming into the markets. I think suddenly you realize, wait a second, like these firms have compliance officers, these firms have privacy requirements that are very different from what the market currently offers. And I think that is the opportunity as well. You address
yeah.
those issues, and you actually bring in some serious players to bootstrap and grow this entire market.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to build out a system that enables someone to transact privately, where they can interact with Hyperliquid, they can interact with any DEX, they can interact with any lending protocol, and do that in a way where they retain custody. They can, you've got near zero latency and incredibly low cost. So, yeah, that is the infrastructure piece to crack. And that can be a DEX that sits on a private DEX that's sitting on top of a layer one as well. So from our perspective at Houdini Swap, layer one architecture is not our key skill, but something like a privacy deck is definitely of interest, for sure. And we should talk about that along with the wallet one day as well, Howard.
We absolutely should. I'm very interested.
Another kind of interesting problem that's plagued the industry is this idea of kind of the value extraction caused by front running and MEV. How does privacy technology in crypto address some of these problems?
Well, at a trading level, if you trade, look, and I'm going to steal a bit of Howard's fire, but if you're trading on a privacy L1 like Aleo, it means that MEV doesn't exist for you, because you simply can't see the transaction to front run it. So as an issue, that it completely disappears. Sorry, I stole your fire, Howard, but
No, you guys are the swapping layer, so I absolutely know that you have insights on this front that are useful to people. And I'm sure you guys get customers all the time that are high net worth individuals that are trying to facilitate a swap, and they run into this exact problem that you can't you can't do it without having everyone see what you're doing. And because of that, people start to front run your trades. Again, going back to the example of having Wall Street come in, like imagine if Vanguard is saying, yes, we are going to rebalance our portfolios for some of these ETFs. And suddenly, every trader in crypto is like, oh my gosh, Vanguard is moving. Like, let's all get in front of them and like,
Yeah.
just take advantage of the fact that we know that they're going to be rebalancing. So this is not a way to run a financial system, right? And I think that is a huge problem. Certainly for the regulators, they're going to be having a crazy day trying to figure out how do we control this. And so I think this is a very clear example of why policymakers taking a serious look at how to regulate markets like this is actually a good thing because it ensures better fairness for people. But for those regulators, they also need to have the tools in their tool belt to do it. And I think privacy tech is exactly where that's going to be.
Couldn't
Houdini
agree more.
Houdini Swap's routing for untraceable compliant transactions features a private DEX leveraging ZK. Can you talk to me about the Houdini Swap roadmap a little bit and what you guys will be?
Yeah. So currently, what happens is that um, our current infrastructure is using non-custodial exchanges, right? And our current private swap utilizes three separate blockchains, along with two off-chain hops into non-custodial exchanges. So we've had a bounty for years, for people to try and crack that. We've actually had professional cryptographers actually tell us it can't be, not with current computing power. I don't think, in fact, in the bounties that we've run, I don't think anyone has actually even got the correct chain, let alone anything near the address. So that's a highly effective architecture on the front end in terms of it's a very, very simple, seamless user experience. It experiences high latency, but again, we've never lost a dollar in more than $2 billion worth of swaps. So it's very, very secure. It's very reliable. The thing for us is exactly the challenge that Howard's talking about, which is how do you onboard institutions? How do you onboard enterprise? They must be able to operate in an environment where they have transactional privacy, and again, how do you enable them to do that where they can transact right across the space in a way that they're not limited, and provide them with custody, zero latency or near zero latency, and at transactional rates that institutions are able to pay. So that's our next challenge, and we're currently deep underway into solving exactly that problem. But but again, it's not necessarily at the full infrastructure layer. It'll be whatever we resolve will be at a layer above that, where we're operating on top of a layer one, in order to our speciality. The thing that distinguishes us is our ability to deliver a UX experience. So how do we deliver a beautiful, seamless UX experience that means that we remove normal friction, that users currently experience? How do we achieve that? So we've definitely got a pathway to that mapped out, and we're resourcing it currently. We're deep into the research phase and about to come out of that, but that's part of our 2026 news.
Excellent. Howard, if kind of Houdini swap is UX, and this kind of more kind of user focused mentality, what's the specialty of Aleo and the technological advantages you guys are creating over there?
Yeah, well, I think the key thing that Josh is highlighting is that, for a lot of the end users, they may not need to know how the privacy tech works under the hood.
Yeah,
And I think the parts that we are trying to really optimize for is making that privacy tech implicitly as buttery smooth as possible as well. And really, the goal is to build out the rails, the settlement rails for solutions like Houdini Swap so that you actually have this opportunity to introduce beautiful UX for people, right? And so, like for us, a big part of the focus for this past year has been around stablecoins. Why? Because stablecoins today are all fully transparent. There's not a single a private stablecoin out there in the market. And we actually just announced at Token 2049 the launch of USAID in collaboration with Paxos Labs to issue the first private and compliant stablecoin. That type of tech is going to unlock capabilities for DeFi throughout, because that is going to be the first demonstration of how you introduce banking level privacy for end traders and allow for dApp developers to utilize it as a trading pair, for example. So I think this is like some of the key features that we're looking at, and now we're looking much further into, how do we enable that for all types of digital assets? How do we enable that for all types of dApps on chain as well? And really, it's about finding the folks who understand it, like Houdini, to be able to figure out what are the design requirements that you actually need in a network for this, and then integrating those on the protocol level, on the base level, so that you have an ecosystem with the exact opcodes and the exact capabilities for these user journeys.
Yeah.
Excellent. I know you guys have kind of mentioned it, but there are some kind of opportunities for technological collaboration between Houdini Swap and Aleo, specifically maybe Houdini Swap leveraging Aleo's ZKP infrastructure for enhanced private DeFi features or embedding swaps in Aleo dApps. Talk to me a little bit more about the potential for kind of intellectual cross-pollination between the two teams.
I mean, I would jump in and say I think it's a very complementary set. And to me, I'd say like, the areas that we've been most focused on going forward are going to be around wallets, stablecoins, and bridges. Why? Because those are the things you need to build a robust ecosystem, certainly on the L1 level. And so, when you have a good wallet experience, you actually have users that can come in and have a good first impression of a blockchain that has privacy on it. You need stable coins, as I just mentioned, because you need something to settle into, and you want to keep those balances private there. And then, of course, you need bridges. Why? Because a blockchain without bridges is not very interesting. It's kind of like an island just sitting out there in the ocean, connected to nothing. So, when you have good bridges, you have a lot of token types. And for us, a big part of what we've been looking at is how can we offer, for example, private Bitcoin, private ETH, private Solana, private Polygon. These are tokens that users already have in their wallets today, and we'd love for them to be able to hold those things in a secure and confidential manner. And so, once you have an ecosystem with these things, it becomes very clear suddenly you need to be able to interchange and swap on those things, right? And I think this is where Houdini really jumps into the picture.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very complimentary because Aleo is doing something pretty remarkable at the like we say that infrastructure layer. In a way, Aleo is like the electricity wires and we're the light switch. We're the kind of the end of the piece, but they actually make all the magic happen underneath. And exactly as Howard said, we want to get to a point where no one even knows that privacy is occurring because it's just simply inherent. From our perspective, we're in that transaction layer. So sitting above that, and one of the key values of a wallet or an effective private wallet that actually is truly private is that in that kind of environment, it gets you as close to the customer as possible. At the end of the day, it really does come down to user convenience. And that's really been the big barrier for privacy is that it's been a friction point in terms of user convenience. So how do you, like wallets are part of that architecture, but from our perspective, they sit neatly between the infrastructure layer and the user UX experience. Now, we care about that transactional layer, and so from a Houdini Swap Aleo partnership perspective, that's very complementary.
Excellent. As far as kind of your guys or your teams and products role in the crypto space, how do you view Aleo in kind of expanding the charge forward to around privacy and Josh, how do you view that same question around Houdini Swap?
Well, I can give you a view on Aleo from Houdini Swap if you like. So then then maybe Hal can do one about us. But it's been like I've prior to this AMA, I've been aware of Aleo, and it's been interesting to watch. And one of the most impressive things is the degree of tier one partnerships that have shown up. So from our perspective, we've demonstrated like a privacy need really through an initial retail user. But when you look at Aleo, what you're seeing is very significant institutional partners like Paxos and WorldPay, Revolut, getting who are very significant financial institutions. So that is that's a remarkable outcome for them, obviously, but really also it's demonstrating just the need. There's this very significant need that must be resolved. And when you're talking about it at that scale, and with those sorts of operators who are looking for rails, both on and off rails, and they want that to occur in a private environment, that infrastructure layer is obviously a big part of that solution. But it's just the sheer quality. I've been sitting there with some degree of jealousy, watching Aleo's recent announcements. So yeah, well done.
So you kind of see the feature set or product market fit kind of being proven out by these partnerships.
Yeah, yeah, well, very much so, because a lot of this is also customized. Because when you're talking about enterprise, it is customized. When you're talking about a WorldPay or you're talking about a Revolut, the sheer size and scale of these businesses means that their requirements are not just a simple API integration, right? They've got their own internal requirements, and that means that at an infrastructure layer, what they're creating in a partnership with Aleo is enormously valuable. And one of the reasons it's valuable is because it's creating, like you're seeing these parties come forth and actually pave the way, right? And in doing so, that's the value that creates in the whole privacy space, but also for Aleo particularly, is very significant. Paving the way with highly reputable companies with enormous assets. I think WorldPay's got 2 trillion or something in transactional volume a year. It's off the top of my head from memory, but it's something of that scale. So they're very significant partners that are going to drive even further adoption.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, from the Houdini side of things, I view technologies like Houdini Swap as an opportunity to introduce a VPN for crypto. That is something that historically has never existed. And I can tell you, as someone who's been in crypto for the last 10, 15 years, like I myself am a believer in that approach. It's something that for us, it's about finding folks who actually understand that, smart teams who actually get it, and are mission aligned on this and vision aligned on it. And so for building an ecosystem that actually enables privacy in crypto, you really need people who actually philosophically are on the same page and then can execute on that vision, right? And this is something that I think the Houdini Swap team has already demonstrated time and time again throughout the years. That early on, the architecture has evolved from where it was, and now they're looking even further at how do we make it even more of a native experience, even better of an experience for customers. And so, to me, looking at it from the outside, like I think of Houdini Swap as an amazing partner to really enable private swaps in the broader ecosystem.
If the last 10 years of crypto has been kind of around or focused on the expansion, growth, scaling of public blockchains, maybe the next 10 years will be around the growth, scaling, and expansion of privacy, tools or products in blockchain. Talk to me about how you guys integrate into existing rails or disrupt and challenge them.
I
Well,
think
sorry, Howard, it's all yours, please.
I was gonna say, I think it's a little bit of both. For one, there are many institutions that are interested in plugging directly into these rails, and for those, designing a pilot that demonstrates how the flow works to educate everyone has been a very useful exercise for us. I'd say there are also many parts of the world where there are teams that are kind of holding out, or there's jurisdictions that are holding out from embracing or adopting crypto, and I'd say for a lot of those areas, it's going to be a disruption story, not because we're disrupting them, but because the market's going to disrupt them. This is financial
Yeah.
tech that is evolving, and I think a lot of respectable jurisdictions are waking up to it and starting to introduce regulation and policy that makes sense for businesses to go out there and operate in. And I think this is one of those unique time and places where if you get it right, you have an opportunity to really reshape what the banking story and the banking infrastructure of the world looks like. And I think that because of that, a lot of founders out there have recognized this and are jumping into crypto and doing this. So to me, I think it's really a story of both. But obviously, the one that I'm most excited by and playing into is this opportunity to plug in and to integrate, because that is how you're going to show people the future.
Yeah, and just to add just to kind of add to Howard's comments, you know, when we think about disruption, across very significant jurisdictions, which may well occur, that's going to be demand driven. It's not going to be crypto companies pushing. It's going to be crypto users, dragging, right? And we saw that with Uber. Right? I mean, Uber had Uber had an incredibly aggressive, incredibly expansionist like growth strategy. But the reason it succeeded is because the value that it provided was so significant that all its like you had all these users all around the planet like basically telling their politicians make this happen, and it did. And from my perspective, that's really where we are right now. With crypto, we've seen this fairly significant shift, really quite transformative shift occur with a change of administration in the states. But that's now flowing through. But what's driving it is people. People are, and so we're going to see. Barriers that we've seen previously to privacy, I think we're going to see fall away, and not because Howard and I are going to drive it, but because our users are going to do that for us. They're going to demand it, and we've seen that happen, time and time again, where you see technology that delivers high value and it just simply just washes over the planet, and suddenly everybody's on board. And I think, and I agree with Howard, is that it's a real turning point.
Yeah.
When you look at technologies, um, we really are at a tipping point.
Yeah, like when a technology is just 10x better, I think users recognize it and they start to use it. And then once they start to use it, payments is inherently a social interaction, and certainly crypto inherently is a social interaction. And so the network effects of that will compound that growth in my
Yeah,
view. And I think that is something that makes this technology very unique. Like, I think when you look at adoption curves, like things like the television, phenomenal, don't get me wrong. But like when you have this ability to send money to someone else and have them also come into the ring with you, you're actually embracing and adopting and bringing folks into this space that otherwise may not have had exposure to it. So that's why I think crypto is far more viral than previous technological kind of phenomena from centuries past.
yeah,
So maybe the current state of privacy in crypto could be kind of defined as the tipping point where we're about to kind of go on this down this new path that's much more privacy focused than we've previously seen.
yeah.
It's
I really think so. Yeah, I think that's a fair call. There's this theory called the diffusion of innovation, which explains how new technology, is marketed and goes through its kind of growth curves. Right? It's been around a long time, but it really does explain well the kind of stages that technological growth goes through. And I think that we're definitely seeing with Bitcoin where it's what's called crossing the chasm. It's moving into mainstream, but we're also seeing crypto really move out of like this sort of very small, very narrow band of what the bold kind of projects. And in this last 12 months, that shift has just been extraordinary. Now, what that provides. I'm excited about the things I don't know. I don't know it. What's coming that we don't know in that space. Because at the end of the day, we're in this to make a difference fundamentally. From a crypto perspective, at the end of the day, we're out to create a better financial system, a fairer financial system, and privacy from a Houdini perspective, and also from an Aleo one, is fundamental to that. We're building out the pieces that enables this to be, to really become something that's effective for people globally, and I think that's a really exciting place, and we're really in this spot right now, from my perspective, when it feels like that there's a shift happening. It's certainly in privacy. Like we're seeing that with obviously with these majors occurring in terms of token adoption by users, but from a privacy perspective, we've just seen this incredible wave. And we're seeing that with funding, but we're seeing that with like some of the projects, for example, that have partnered with Aleo, just wouldn't have considered that 12 months ago. And that's a remarkable turnaround. So yeah, I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, I
Excellent.
think really just to echo that home, when you look at the alternative for crypto, it it's still not great. I recently sent a wire transfer from the US to another major developed economy, and it took 3 days. I had to hop on with my banker on a Zoom call, had to confirm in writing over email, and then it took several days for it to clear on the other side. And when the recipient got the actual currency, because it was in foreign currency, the forex rate had already changed so much that I had to send another wire to top off the difference at that point. And when you look at that, you're like, why didn't I just send a USD stablecoin over the wire instead? Like that would have been so much quicker, so much cheaper, so much faster, and certainly more private if we had some level of privacy in the space. And so to me, this is the opportunity. It's like users don't need to be sold on this new thing per se. They just have to use what there is, and they'll immediately recognize, oh, this is actually just better. And I think that was certainly what got me into crypto early on as well. Was I tried Bitcoin, I tried Ethereum, and I was like, wow, this is like crazy better than what the banks can offer today. But I think that is a user journey that a lot of people are starting to run into now.
Look, the reason I live completely in crypto and have for a long time, and the reason though that I do is because I used to live in Europe, and I'm an Australian, and I was living in Europe, and I'm living and working in Europe, and I had never had this happen to me before in my life, but fairly regularly, like maybe once a month, my account would get stopped, and the bank would say, "We don't recognize this transaction. We want you to validate that it's you." Or that, or can you please, confirm where these funds came from? Now, I'm just a legitimate person, and suddenly my bank account shut down, and in more cases than I can possibly count, I had to physically go into the bank, right, with my passport, right, and prove to them who I was in order for me to get my bank account back. And I'd never experienced this before, right? And it got so annoying because of the context called "I'm a criminal until I can prove to you that I'm innocent," rather than the other way around. But the bank was like the banks, and it wasn't just one bank; it was multiple banks. The algorithm says no, right? And so suddenly, the inconvenience that you're placed under because of, this banking system, and everything I'm doing is like you can see my accountant manages all of my crypto transactions, but I literally decided one day this is just not worth it. Like, and I think it was because I was actually out on a weekend on a Sunday, with my partner, and I went to pay, and I only had one credit card on me, and it happened to be this bank, and it had shut my account down, and I couldn't validate it until Monday, and I had no money, right? And it was just like, this is crazy. So, like that we got two examples here, but that's just an example of why I decided to move into crypto, and I think that those sorts of instances that we're seeing constantly, I think they're being replicated millions of times. Now, from our perspective, that brings people into crypto, and privacy becomes an important part of people's needs and concerns. Literally, in a very short period of time, once they enter crypto and they realize suddenly, oh, everything I'm doing is being exposed. How do I protect myself? So, we're seeing this growing wave of crypto users, but we're seeing a much more sophisticated crypto user who has much higher demands. And legitimately so. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great selling point and a great note to wrap up on. Howard, Josh, thanks so much for being here today, and thanks so much
Pleasure.
for sharing your thoughts.
Thanks for
Thanks,
having me.
Jack. Real pleasure.